Hey people, Dodger Dave here, about to examine carefully the words of LDS shill Kwaku L as he seeks to do a little damage control for the churches getting outed recently by the whistleblower regarding the pretty secretly held $100 billion over there in ensign peak advisors, while their directors lied to the tune of like 60,000 to 1, maybe on average, on what they told. Yeah, a factor of 60,000 to 1 to the IRS on how much their assets were really worth. Made illegal distributions, including a bank bailout, with tithing money, and then lied to you, the LDS, the Latter day Saint member, the saints, about it in general conference. Your presiding bishop has lied about it. Your first presidency has lied about it. And they are well aware of this stuff. So let's see if Kwaku tries to get to the truth here, or if he's going to use obfuscation techniques. Let's see if he's going to pivot like Hillary Clinton, or if he's going to actually deal with the massive problems here to the assertion to try to, can this be reconciled to an all-knowing, unchanging, righteous God leading righteous brethren who have told us time and again how we need to be honest in our dealings with our fellow men? Well, maybe not with our fellow corporation. I mean, that's, there's a point. I mean, the IRS is not a good organization, but the LDS Church pretends to be one, and children are dying in Utah. Housewives are on antidepressants in Utah. Marriages are on the rocks. People are in foreclosure. People are in bankruptcy in high numbers compared to people that are not in an LDS cult-driven community. When your number one cause of death is suicide for teenagers, well, let's say ages 11 through 17, for instance, do you think maybe something's wrong? Yeah, anyway. Reminds me of the book Marvelous Work and a Wonder by Apostle LeGrand Richards, when the fruits of the restored gospel of Jesus Christ were being touted by stating statistical information on how healthy people in Utah were. Church ain't using statistics from Utah anymore to brag, because opiate overdose, antidepressant use, especially by the woman folk, and suicide by the children, that doesn't look good. When we had the financial crisis, a lot of Mo's were going down. Well, maybe they didn't put their tithing into the debt ratio. Of course, you don't have to do that, but the fact is, Mormonism destroys lives, destroys individuality with the cult behavioral control practices, and it destroys your finances, and it wastes tons of your time serving this multi-billion-dollar corporation that's told us time and again that the work of the Lord couldn't continue without our generous offerings, without our required tithe. And then they ask for more. And hey, they're asking for more now from the missionaries. When the fact of the matter is, they make so much interest off their investments right now just from ensign peak advisors that no one would ever have to pay another tithe for any of the church programs to be completely funded. But the Lord doesn't need your money. He's just doing it to make sure that you want to obey. Is that it? Anyway, enough of my pre-video rant. We're going to look at Kwaku's techniques and see if he is an honest young man, or if he's just a dishonest shill, spouting his normal, covering up by pointing the finger and pivoting, pointing the finger using his usual racist, anti-white hate speech, which people should notice, because yeah, you know what? It is racist when it's anti-white. Okay, we've been conditioned to believe it's only whites are racist. Well, this guy's racist. He's just it's all those white folk out in California. They're the problem. Yeah. Kwaku, your eyes don't look honest. Let's see what the rock and roll truth meter says. Let's see. Oh, don't we have any music? Come on, what happened to my song? What happened to my song? How are we going to play anything here? God, it was all set up. It was so ready to go. What? Pause. Gotta pause this stuff. A mini pause, not menopause, people. Whatever. All right, let's go, Kwaku.
Hi, let's talk about money.
Yeah, let's do that.
Not following the story, I'm going to give you a rundown. There's a guy named David Nielsen, and he worked for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints investment arm, Ensign Peak Advisors, and he basically wrote an expose article on how much money is in the investment arm of the church. He actually wrote an expose to the IRS, and the whole story got picked up by the Washington Post, and then boom, everyone has been giving their opinion on this whole thing. It turns out Ensign Peak has about $100 billion. And when this was leaked, you had a lot of members saying, well, okay, yeah, we have a lot of money. We're the richest church on this hemisphere. And so the funny thing is, right when this article came out, everyone was immediately a tax expert. Everyone was immediately an expert on tax policy. And they're saying, oh my gosh, they have $100 billion in their investment arm? That is terrible. They should be taxed. Tax the churches. Let's break this whole thing down. Now, is this really a problem? No. And by the way, everything's going to be linked in the description below, so you can go and click on it and reading, give us your whole opinion. So first, is this really...
Okay, so it's not a problem. And we have to be experts on tax policy. Actually, there's tax code that's shown right in the presentation from this David Nielsen. Is it David Nielsen, or is it... Yeah, there's two guys. There's the guy who did I think David Nielsen is the guy presenting it, okay? He shows the tax code. He shows the church's filings, and they're completely dishonest. They violate the tax code. It's very clear. And they've lied at a factor of 60,000 to 1 and more, okay? In their filings, $60,000 to every $1 they had, they lied about. Year after year. Okay? Started out 38,000 to 1 and then went higher. So I'm just pulling a number out of my Joseph Smith hat. No, I don't. That hat's somewhere else. All right, so he's using techniques right here. Putting it out there and then saying, but I'm going to show all the shit in the description, so it's all good. Okay, well, I don't know what his you know what? I haven't checked Kwaku's footnotes. But if it's anything like the church's footnotes, probably ought to check them out very carefully. He's got the Washington... Actually, I think I did look earlier. He's got like the Washington Post article in there. Okay, great. Did he have the whole PDF with all the documents in it I don't know. Look and see. Good example, but this is NLP. This is how you get people to feel like, hey, the guy's being upfront. He's being honest. Shit, he's got stuff in the links, for God's sakes, right? Well, the church does that too. For instance, on the first vision, on one of the pages on LDS.org, formerly LDS.org, before that was a victory for Satan. Now it's the Church of Jesus Christ.org. God, it's just so important. So, in the story there, on one of these pages where they're presenting the 1820 appearance, in other words, the 1838 published in 1842 version of the first vision, where there's a God the Father and a Son, Jesus Christ guy. This is the first that anybody's heard of this stuff after all those years, even though Joseph Smith said he was persecuted. Anyway, in that story, they say, and William Smith, that's a brother of Joe, right? said that the reason that the Smith family believed his really out of this world story, it's kind of unusual. Your kid comes home and said, "Hey, I saw God this morning and his son Jesus." And I went and said my first prayer in my life and they just appeared. Okay, so you're saying that William Smith said, well, we had reasons to believe the boy. He was a truthful boy. And so they're using that footnote as like it's a third-party reference that Joseph Smith was honest, and that it's validating in some way, this 1820 vision. Well, if you look up the footnote, which I did, and I've got that in one of my videos on my, First Vision page of the Mormon Truth Videos Gospel Topics Hub. If you look at the footnote, if you look it up, it goes to a book, I believe, written by, William Smith. And guess what? He said that quote, that is a quote, but it wasn't in support of an 1820 vision. It was in support of what William Smith thought was the first vision. 1823. If you read further, you'll find out, if you investigate that subject further, you'll find out that, Joseph Smith had claimed that he went to pray in 1823 to find out if God existed, if a supreme being did indeed exist. Well, that's a problem if you've seen God in 1820. So there they go, putting down basically references as if they're going to support, the narrative, but they actually don't hold water sometimes when you look them up like that particular one didn't. Let's hide this a little bit more. Okay, great. So, just alerting you to techniques. Now let's continue and see if he answers the real issues, the dishonesty of the brethren, both to the IRS and to the LDS church membership. Let's see if we have honest brethren or if they are habitually disingenuous. And let's see if Kwaku is like unto them.
Whistleblow. No. See, a whistleblower is usually someone who's a part of an organization or has information in an organization that they're doing something corrupt. But the fact is, the church isn't doing anything corrupt. They just have money. We're just really smart with our money. See, a lot of churches have something called a donation basket. You'll go to many, many evangelical churches, Protestant churches, maybe the Catholic Church. No, I don't think so. Maybe. But a lot of different churches have something called a donation basket. And they'll take a basket and they'll push it around. People will be sitting in the pews or chairs, and as the basket goes around, they can put in however much money they want.
Okay, seriously, this shit is completely irrelevant. Either they broke the law, and either they've lied about this stuff for the whole time, either they've claimed eligibility for charitable, donation, charitable support organization qualifications, and then not qualified. Either they have lied to the church members, saying that they have not used tithing funds in business ventures, or they haven't. So he's going to give us just a lot of fluff to muddy the waters and to get us thinking about other things than the primary questions, which are black and white, yes and no.
To give offerings to the church to help build up their church and religion. We don't do that at our church. We do it digitally online, and we give 10% to the church. Now, a lot of people might ask, why does the church need your money? Well, we covenant to give all things to God. So we give our time to the building up of the kingdom of God and preaching the gospel. We give our talents.
Okay, so he poses the question, why does the church need this money? 10% of your income. And then he sounds like he's answering it, but he's not answering it. The question, why does the church need the money? Well, they don't need the money they don't need it at this point at all to function, because they've got so much money over there at Ensign Peak Advisors with an average annual return rate of investment of 7%, which has been compounding. So the church at that rate could continue on with all of its expenses and Ensign and still grow. the money still grows. So they don't need your money. But is he answering why the church needs the money? No. He's just saying, we covenant to give everything to them. Okay, so that doesn't mean they need it. That means they con you into making a covenant that you think is with, the sky daddy up here, right? They use this imaginary individual, okay, and you're making a covenant with this guy out here. Do I do the Illuminati confirmed like Jimmy Snow did? This is my style, the Illuminati confirmed. Okay, so this Illuminati controlled organization takes your money by way of covenant in the temple when you state that you'll give everything. That doesn't tell us anything about what the church needs the goddamn money for. So this is a technique that he's using to pretend like he's answering a question, and he's not.
Your talent that you're a good singer, maybe you make YouTube videos, like whatever your talent is, you give part of that to God. You give your everything to God, and people are like, I will give my everything to God. Hey, what about giving money to like print more Bibles?
You're not giving it. You're to whoever this God is. You're giving it to a corporation who's pretending that they represent an imaginary fucking being. Okay, let's keep going. Who is then there? And because of this separation, you've got this entity. You're covenanting with this entity, but to obey his representatives here. But the blessings that you're supposed to get over here for keeping the commandments, well, they are dealt out not by the corporation, but by the God guy. And therefore, the corporation has no responsibility in whether or not you are blessed for paying them the money and following these leaders, because they got this imaginary dude out here, and if you don't get the blessings, well, that was God's fault, and God's got a reason for it, and it's usually because it's your fault, because you got a secret sin. You're probably you're probably smoking in the backyard or something. Not telling your bishop.
No, I ain't gonna do that. God don't need my wallet. Well, no, he doesn't, but yeah, he does. We give everything. We covenant in the temple to give ourselves to the kingdom of God. And so, unfortunately, the one thing nobody ever wants to give is any money. But we gladly give money, and this goes to printing scriptures, it goes to helping people, it goes to doing a number of amazing, wonderful things. And with this tithing money, the church builds temples, helps run church schools, helps maintain buildings, prints scriptures, all sorts of things like that. And because of this money, the church can also invest in other things to get even more money. For example, it's pretty well documented that Salt Lake City was in financial trouble years ago. Some say on the brink of a recession. You can find whatever economist or journalist you want to give their opinion on that, but there's a lot of sources that make it pretty clear Salt Lake City was about to go into a recession. So what the church did was they built something called City Creek Mall right in downtown Salt Lake City across from the Salt Lake Temple. And what this did is it brought a ton of jobs to Salt Lake City. It brought Nordstrom, not Nordstrom Rack, by the way, Nordstrom, the Cheesecake Factory, H&M, all these amazing places to City Creek Mall, honestly the best mall in Utah. And it's beautiful and huge. It made Salt Lake City better for tourists. It made it better for restaurants, small business, big business. Because the church had good investments and good money, they could actually put forward something in a city and actually save it from going under. And we did this because of investments. So our church is smart with investments. We don't just have a donation basket. We say, look, we want to be a church that is all over the world. We're trying to prepare the world for the second coming of Jesus Christ. We have a mandate given to us by God himself to build temples all over the world, right? So people can go and make their covenants with God and get a higher...
And we know this because some huckster told us that, right? That this was a commandment by the God of Israel, or the God of Mormonism. Nice look there, Kwaku, by the way. The City Creek Mall, however, the brethren have told us specifically that this commercial venture was not funded by tithing money, or tithing money that hadn't already been invested in something else and then become less sacred or something. We're not using sacred money for these sorts of things. But is Kwaku going to address that? Or is he just going to try to make it sound like, well, it brought business, so it's okay that they did that, even though they've lied to the members about it? And when you're giving that tithing when it really hurts, how much did you want to think that it was going to build a mall? Or maybe to buy a cattle ranch in Florida? Or wherever else they've got this money invested and have been unwilling to tell you about. So unwilling that they have lied to the tune of over 60,000 to 1 ratio on what they really had over there at Ensign Peak Advisors. Is he going to address that? I think not.
Level of understanding and learning that's only available in the temple. So guess what? You got to have money to do that. That's the kind of society we live in. God expects us to work within the systems we have. So this guy, David Nielsen, isn't really a whistleblower because there's nothing really to uncover. We just are smart with money. But the Washington Post actually says this. In a declaration signed under penalty of perjury, Nielsen urges the IRS to strip the nonprofit of its tax-exempt status and alleges that Ensign could owe billions in taxes. He is seeking a reward from the IRS, which offers whistleblowers a cut of unpaid taxes that it recovers. There it is. He wants money. The guy who did this is like, okay, wait. They have a lot of money and they're not paying taxes, but they should. Although you can't tax churches in America because separation of church and state, it'd be a terrible idea if you did. But he's basically saying they should pay taxes on this, and if they do, then I'll get a cut.
Unless, of course, you pay me $100 billion.
Now, this report is so terrifying, it destroys the church, and we know everything he's saying is real.
Okay, so now he's going to use a little mockery, but it's one thing for a church to have tax-exempt status as a charitable organization for assets that are dedicated for charitable use only. Ensign Peak Advisors is not directly under the umbrella of that corporate structure. They're out here because their sole purpose is investment. And that doesn't qualify. That doesn't qualify, as the presentation shows, which I actually will give the link to, and I've already done a video on. All right, Travis, come on, get on out of here. So, Ensign Peak Advisors is not a charitable organization, and to be a charitable support organization, they need to be making charitable contributions. They need to be spending money on charitable causes and church education, all this kind of stuff, but they don't. Not one penny. Not one penny. So Kwaku may infer, oh, well, they gave it back to the church, and maybe they spend it on this. The church gives the money, the overages that they've already taken care of all the budgets underneath this pyramid here, underneath the corporation of the president, and the presiding bishopric's got all this, budget that they deal with, and then whatever's just, otherwise just not going to be making money, they take it over here. Well, great, that sounds like a sound financial principle, but like I said, they've been completely dishonest in order to obtain the tax-free, status over there. They would have had to pay billions in dollars in taxes. I'm not saying that it's right to pay money to the IRS. I mean, they're essentially a privately owned collection arm for the banksters, and were established on a fraudulent basis. One thing, besides the federal income tax, actually being something that seems opposed to the Constitution, they also promised, I think right in the bill there, the tax, percentage would never exceed 1%. So, but not to get off on a tangent or into another rabbit hole too much here. The fact is that they've lied on a consistent basis when they tell us, hey, You need to be forthright and all this bullshit and give unto Caesar's what is Caesar's and all that kind of stuff, right out of the Roman gospel theme, which was invented for Rome, right? For Rome's benefit. And here they're not doing that. So Kwaku is attempting to obfuscate and pivot and avoid the real issues here.
Oh, no, wait, we don't. It's reported in a confidential document received by the IRS November 21st. So, okay, it's tucked away in a secret document given to the IRS. So any organization that has a lot of money, whether it's a church or a business or a nonprofit or whatever, it's complicated. Money is complicated, and where you allocate certain...
Actually, it's not necessarily that complicated. We've been shown very, very, very straightforward situations documented. You know, here's the code, here's the law, here's what they applied for, and then here's what they did. Here's what they really had, and here's what they told the IRS they had. Here's what the employees are told, and and then here's the opposite that they tell the presiding bishopric, what the real skinny is on where the money goes. So, no, sorry, Kwaku. And, the guy wants a reward, so we're going to say, well, his motivation, he just wants money, so we'll just discredit everything he says. And now, so Kwaku's attempting to discredit the information here, but if you look at it, no, that's just not possible. We can see tax returns where these guys are lying, and the presiding bishopric knows about it. The first presidency knows about it. And it goes on year after year. So, character assassination, the attempt to discredit. If you had facts that actually defended your position, Kwaku, you'd probably use them, but you're not. Instead, you're shooting the messenger, trying to discredit them. You're dealing with everything. You're focusing on everything but the real issue. Why is that? Why is that?
Funds, where you invest certain funds, all those things is a complicated system. And the church doesn't just unveil its system to the public because that would be a disaster. So when the story broke, everyone just assumed that they're now an expert on how the church's finance system works. You're not. You don't know what you're talking about. I barely know what I'm talking about, and I'm a Mormon. So now people are asking, well, if the church...
Oh, you're a Mormon, so that entitles you to additional information? Well, yeah, I mean, that's what Gordon B. Hinckley said. He said that that belongs... the knowledge of what happens with these funds belongs to those who give it, except he wouldn't, and no other church president is giving the information either. So what's that statement about, Kwaku? It was another completely irrelevant statement. And the system of investments is not... That is not what the issue is. What the issue is the violation of the trust of the people, the dishonesty, the fraud, the clear violation of code by which they are to abide. And are we going to assume now that a corporation with a $100 billion investment arm doesn't have tax attorneys that... No. They had no fucking idea. That's illegal to bail out banks with tithing money when you're calling yourself a charitable support organization? Who wouldn't thunk that? Once again, he's trying to use all these other points which are bullshit, to get our mind off the real issue. This is what dishonest people do when they understand techniques that are needed and that work. And that's what he's doing. Throwing shit at the messenger and doing everything he can to get you to not look at the real issues, which he never addresses.
Has $100 billion. How come they're not giving to charity and helping the homeless? Well, we are. Is Ensign Peak Advisors, the investment arm of the church, are they giving to charity? I don't know. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. But here's the thing. If they're not, that doesn't matter. Do you know why? Because investment arms don't give to charity. We have the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And under the church, you have a bunch of different organizations. You have LDS Charities, LDS...
Investment arms then therefore are not qualifying in this case as a charitable organization, a support organization. So it does matter. You lied again, Kwaku. And now he's going to, well, maybe they do, maybe they don't. Believe me, if they did, they would have shown documents to that effect. When you have the evidence to refute something, you're going to use it. Okay? You don't need to say maybe in that case, okay? You would use it.
Philanthropies, and a number of others that give things to the homeless. They give aid around the world to refugees, people who need it, all sorts of things like that. People, lower income families in the United States and Canada and everywhere. Like, we've got charitable arms of the church. So what is almost definitely happening is that if we have money in our investments we want to give to charity, why would Ensign Peak Advisors and investment arms say, all right, here, Alabama, here's $20 million. No, if anything, they would transfer that money to LDS charities or LDS philanthropies, and they would give it to whoever they need to. It's so strange that you judge the investment arm for not giving money when the money from the investment arm is probably going to the charity arm. Every year, the church gives about $40 million.
Probably. Listen, if they had a way to show the legality of their compliance, then they'd be doing that. They wouldn't be lying and saying that their net assets were like $1 million when they were 50 billion and now 100 billion. There's a huge difference. So now Kwaku's gonna go and he's gonna just make all this $40 million worth of charity so real in your mind. He's gonna talk about wheelchairs they donated, all kinds of things that have been done with $40 million a year. And to you and I, that sounds like a lot of money. I mean, shit, if I had $40 million a few years ago, I probably could have I could have bought I could have bought Nicolas Cage's house on the on the beachfront house in Laguna or something, overlooking the beach, right? $40 million. You could buy a really expensive house with, Well, I kind of pared it down. Sure, it's a nice house, but it's only one house. So this entire church gives $40 million to charity. $40 million. Well, so the church's assets have been growing and growing and growing and growing. So Ensign Peak Advisors was established, what was it, like 1997 in September, right? A month after Time Magazine kind of outed the church for being worth what they estimated, like 30 billion or something. And so the church transferred some of its investment stuff over into the new organization, Ensign Peak, and it's grown from 12 billion in net assets to over 100 billion. But how much was the church giving to charity, using for things that are qualifying as charitable then? Should have been a lot less then, right? Or 40 billion. It's been 40 billion for a long time. Now, I'm not sure exactly how long, but it's been for a long time. So that's the ceiling. And it's like, it's well under, it's less than 0.5% of what it takes in just in like estimated tithing. Okay? So, which is about the same, very similar amount to what Ensign Peak Advisors is now reaping at a 7% return rate on $100 billion annually. 40 million, 7 billion annual just investment profit. Yeah, that's just over 0.5%, right? If it was 40 million and it was 35 million, versus 7, or 40 million versus 8, that's 0.5%. So it's like 55%, whatever, of a percent. It's barely more than 0.5% of what they're just getting on freaking interest on investments. So even though that number sounds big, it's a pittance. It's a pittance. And with all of this money coming in, they're gonna beat up on middle class Americans and Canadians and whoever else, to pay even more money to fund for their kids to go on missions, going from 400 to 500 a month. When they should, it's just ridiculous. You're paying so that you can go make more business for these guys, and they've got so much money they don't even have the infrastructure to give the amount of money that would be commensurate or the norm. Like normally, a charitable, type of organization, or a tax-free foundation is going to need to give away 5% of its assets annually. So 5% of the total of say $200 billion. That's a lot of money. Yeah, that's a lot of money. It's $2 billion. So $40 million is squat. Great, you could have bought Nicolas Cage's house. That's nothing for an organization this size. And the number is shrinking on a percentage basis all the time versus the church's total assets. Why? Why aren't they? What do they tell people? You better sell your couch and your television. I've read people talk about what their treatment like in places like Brazil and so forth when they needed some help from the bishop's storehouse. I lived in Costa Rica. I didn't see a bishop's storehouse. With so-and-so, when, brother, whatever, Sanchez or somebody didn't have enough money, to feed his family, they'd tell the people, hey, why don't you guys why don't you all bring a can of beans, to church next week? That's how it worked. That is how it worked. I brought beans for people who didn't, they weren't given anything out of a bishop's storehouse, at least not in the Wild West where we were. Meanwhile, these guys are sitting on just tens of billions of dollars, maybe it wasn't 100 billion then, maybe it was 60 billion, I don't know, but it's so enraging to think how rich this church is, and then they'll tell people, just sell your furniture before you use this, ask for the sacred funds of the Lord. Because they need to be over there making more money for these hucksters, for this for this empire. People wonder where I get angry. Shit.
Donations. So we help a lot of people. We give about 40 million a year. Also, last year the church had about 177 emergency response projects in 56 countries.
Well, I don't really give a shit.
This is 56 different countries. We had.
You spent there was 40 million.
How come they're not getting more to charity? They should that's what they should do. The reality is this.
Yeah, they should give a lot more.
Whose lives have been saved when the church gave them glasses and clean water and medicine and aid and food. Evidence. That's my opinion. They openly oppress women, queer people, and people of color. Again, by the way, if I have one more white liberal woman talking on behalf of people of color, I'm going to lose my mind. Can you please stop it? Literally, please stop. I don't know why Tina Fey thinks she speaks for black people. There's a big building on Temple Square called the Relief Society Building. The Relief Society are the female leaders of the church. They're called the General Auxiliary Presidency, led by President Jean B. Bingham. The Relief Society is the largest and oldest female-only organization in the entire world. Right.
That has nothing to do with whether or not these guys broke the law or lied to us. Multiple times, by the way, if you bother to watch this, he just, he's just ragging on white people. Yeah, I get so sick of it.
And this is a thing we embrace that gives us the meaning to life, helps us understand where we came from, where we're going, helps us understand the importance of all of God's creation, helps us understand.
No, it doesn't. It just cons you and gives you a phony theology so that you can be roped in and then blackmailed that you'll lose your family forever if you don't keep fucking paying. That's what the temple's about, Kwaku.
How sin can be atoned for, all of these important things that are deep within the fabric of humanity and things that give us meaning and help us be better people, things that are embedded within our history and culture. He says, screw it all, F those people, they're a cult, they're a multi-level marketing scheme, who cares? Again, this is just bigotry. This is literal bigotry, and happiness Again, these people, it's bigotry. That's all it is. The story is wild and unbelievable and disgusting. Mormon churches misled members on a $100 billion tax-exempt investment fund. Whistleblower alleges the Washington Post. Again, these people who don't believe in the church have a lot of faith that the church is corrupt, even when the facts don't show that. They just, if it's anti-Mormon, just push it out there and just say whatever you want, because if it's anti-Mormon, people will go, crazy cult, we hate them. Hey, they help people in third world countries that you literally have never helped and don't care about. Shut up! No, unfortunately, the mainstream media doesn't care when the...
Which third world countries have you lived in, Kwaku? I've lived in Central America for 5 years. I've lived in Mexico for a little under a year. I didn't see it. In all fairness, I wasn't going to church when I was in Mexico, but no, in Costa Rica, they oh God, give me a break. Oh, if there were some people that qualified for they can get a 3% loan or something like that, and then go to a tech school or something so that they can wind up paying more in tithing. No, they weren't given gifts of that. Oh. And maybe the church paid the money out. It didn't make them pay for a mission while they're serving the corporation. I mean, whatever works for the bottom line. If they can squeeze it out of you, they will. If they're going to get free service out of you, and they can't con you out of $400 or $500 a month, then maybe that's what they're going to do. Like I said, I was asked to bring beans for my neighbors because the bishop's storehouse wasn't forking out shit to these people where I live.
Church helps people. They just don't. And so when they say things like, they're not charitable, they don't help people, we do. You just don't care about the people that we help because you don't care about African people. You don't care about South American people. You don't care about people in the Near East or Greater Asia. You just don't. And because you don't see who we help. But if you do care about those people, if you do care about people in second world countries, then you would understand why the church is necessary and why it's an important force in the United States and the world. But ultimately, you just don't care about foreigners. You don't care when they're helped. You don't care how they're helped. You're just an upper middle class white liberal person in California eating your cheese and wine, and you go, oh, those crazy cultists in their underwear. A lot of these people in media grew up with a prejudice about Mormons. They were taught we were crazy polygamists in school, and their churches said Mormons are bad, they're servants of Satan, and their parents said they're a cult. And they go, and because you don't see who we help. But if you do care about those people, if you do care about people in second world countries, then you would understand why the church is necessary and why it's an important force in the United States and the world. But ultimately, you just don't care about foreigners. You don't care when they're helped. You don't care how they're helped. You're just an upper middle class white liberal person in California eating your cheese and wine, and you go, oh, those crazy cultists in their underwear.
So he tries to use the liberal strategy of saying that those who are against the church's dishonesty are haters, while he's using anti-white hate speech to do it. Over and over, this is his pattern. Poor us, we're given so much. We're given over 0.5% of our annual interest on investments. Then multiply that number by a factor of about 26, I guess, if you're going at 200 billion, and figure out, so you're dividing a little more than 0.5% by like 26, and that's the percentage of what the church actually gives of its net worth as charitable. And you're calling yourselves a charitable organization? Holy shit. Hitler was more charitable than that, most likely.
A lot of these people in media grew up with a prejudice about Mormons. They were taught we were crazy polygamists in school, and their churches said Mormons are bad, they're servants of Satan, and their parents said they're a cult. And they go, we don't like them, they're a cult. And so when they see our church succeeding and doing well, they get mad. Because they don't want us to be succeeding. So they're just like, Mormons, brr. But ultimately, it's like, dude, you can hate us all you want, but guess what? When disaster strikes, we will be there to help you. Because that's the kind of people we are. So one guy writes a confidential report that is, honestly, it got leaked out, by the way, and it's a terrible report. I can't believe anyone who works for Church Investment wrote this. It looks like it was written by a cashier at Jiffy Lube. This report gets leaked, and then people just spread it around, and they go, can't believe the church is so evil. There's really no evidence to back up what he's...
It looks like it was written up by a cashier at Jiffy Lube. And then what did he say about Bill Reel? He's the Kmart of anti-Mormonism. So this is Kwaku's style, just talking shit about people. But actually, if you look at just the documents that the guy shows in the presentation, which are just a small portion of what happened to be in the 77-page PDF file, he's actually very done a nice job. It's very well documented. You just see, here's what they tell their employees, and here's what they tell the presiding bishopric, the exact opposite, that kind of a thing. So anyway, let's take a look at the presentation. Let's take a look at just a little bit of it, and compare that to this rant that we've gotten from Kwaku, which has answered none of the pertinent questions. Instead, it's given us fluff. He's tried to bring our focus away from the fact that LDS church leaders and church employees have been completely dishonest with legal entities, or whatever you want to call the fucking IRS, and with the LDS people. Let's look at that, and just keep in mind the fact that this far into the video, of course, we skipped ahead and so forth. Look at it yourself if you want. He hasn't answered anything having to do with whether or not these people have made dishonest statements to the members, or if they have made illegal contributions or illegal disbursements for a charitable support organization to bail out a fucking bank or to build a shopping mall. They're violating their charter. Okay? They haven't made charitable contributions. They've lied to the people about the use of tithing funds. And they grossly lied at a factor of like 60,000 to 1 about their net assets to the IRS. Year after year. Did Kwaku deal with this shit? No. He used obfuscation techniques, drew your attention away from it. Why? Kwaku avoids the facts because they don't serve him well. Gordon B. Hinckley said that the data, the knowledge of what the church does with its money belongs to those who contribute it, not to the world. But he didn't give it to us. The facts support the fact that these guys have lied to us over and over and over. And the man presenting this material has painstakingly documented these facts, how dishonest our brethren in the first presidency and presiding bishopric are. And now we shall see him demonstrate that further. And then there shall be a part 2.
Can handle the extra accounting burden. Require these gigachurches to distribute or spend 5% of their assets every year the way all typical private foundations must. But the IRS is not the only body that needs to hold the COP, the CPB, and EPA leadership accountable. Right now I'm going to present and analyze several quotes from leaders in each of these 3 areas, and you judge whether they are being honest in their dealings with their fellow men. This guy...
Okay, so... Those acronyms, he states at the very beginning of the video what those represent. So we're talking about COP, Corporation of the President of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Corporation of the Presiding Bishopric, and then the EPA would be Ensign Peak Advisors. So that's who we're talking about here. Top church brass, top church. These guys are all business brass. I mean, that's where our so-called ecclesiastical leaders come from. That we just get this myth that they're holy boys, but they're all company executives, and then the portion that everybody does recognize as company executives would be the corporate officers who are accountable to these guys, and whose behavior they are accountable for, yet we see that they're all completely dishonest. So let's continue. So here we got Dallin Oaks. Honest or not honest?
Mr. Dallin H. Oaks is a member of the COP and a trustee of EPA. The Deseret News, which we all know is owned by the COP, reported, and this was, I believe, in 2016, that Mr. Oaks gave a lecture at the University of Oxford in which he boasted that the total contributions of the Mormon Church to all humanitarian aid efforts was a whopping 40 million with an M, per year, and that amount, 40 million, was pretty flat over the last 30 years. Again, this money didn't come from EPA, like it came from other legal entities that are under COP, under that pyramid. Regardless, I think it's helpful to point out that in 2016, $40 million equaled 0.05% of the 81 billion reserve of the reserves. It equaled 0.8% of that year's investment growth alone. Every quarter, Mr. Oaks sits in an IPC meeting with basically 9 white men, and they decide that for another year, $40 million should remain the ceiling on humanitarian aid, and that the reserves should stay frozen for yet another quarter. They pray about it and feel inspired to give $40 million each year, and each year put 200 times that amount into the reserves that are already well beyond 100 billion. What is the COP's purpose?
Just noting, would he say that they were 9 old black men or brown men? But now, even this guy, if he's going to take a shot at somebody's race, well, the only race that you're not racist taking a shot at is the white boys. So he's being very politically correct. And at least agreeing with Kwaku that the white boys are the bad ones here.
In donating annually what would amount to only a few hundredths of 1% of its reserves, and set that up as a testimony to the world that the COP is doing an impressive work. Could it be that they want to anchor the public and the membership and maybe the IRS into thinking that the COP must only have a small fraction of its true assets? Let Mr. Oaks tell the IRS and the Senate Oversight Committee why EPA has taken $20 billion in tax breaks without doing anything religious, educational, or charitable in 22 years. Actually, the better man for that job is Henry B. Eyring. He was a founding...
Okay, you know what? I'm going to slow this guy down. I was 125 in Kwaku, but I think it's more useful to listen to him at normal speed. And so, also, if in case you didn't catch that, so since the church has been giving about, $40 million per year for the last, what did he say, like 30 years? In other words, that hasn't increased as the value of church assets have grown enormously since that time. And so he mentioned that a possible or a probable motivation for that was to anchor in the belief that the assets weren't, growing. Because if the church was giving, 8 times as much money to charitable causes now as it was in 1997, when it had $12 billion to stick over in this fund. Not that doesn't include the other church's other assets, right? But they stuck in this in what he's referring to as the reserve of the reserves. When he's talking, that's when he says that he's talking about Ensign Peak Advisors. So he feels he's suggesting that it would attract attention to the obvious growth of church assets if they did increase the amount commensurate with the amount of its assets. So, they're actually giving less than ever before, or less than they have for the last 30 years when adjusted for inflation. But who cares about the people? Image is everything, like Andre Agassi said, right?
Trustee of EPA, and in the first presidency of the COP way back in 1997, and is still in that quarterly meeting with Mr. Oaks today. Apparently, the widow's mite is so sacred that it can never be spent once it's buried in a mountain. It's as if the COP has taken the parable of the talents, way too literally. As the story goes, you'll recall one servant was chastised for hiding his entrusted money in the earth. He was wicked and slothful because he wasn't investing. But would the master be pleased with the COP for entombing its investments in a mountain peak? Isn't the deeper meaning of the parable to use your investment returns the way a master would want you to use them? Being hungry, clothing the naked, sheltering the homeless. Neither surplus tithing nor invested surplus tithing returns have ever left EPA for a religious, educational, or charitable purpose. I don't think the master would be well pleased. Then there's this guy, Monsieur Gérald Gausset. I am going to recommend that you seriously buckle in to smash through his disingenuous and misleading statements. They are remarkable. He is the highest-ranking bishop in the Mormon Church, president of the CPB, member of the IPC, and he gave a talk last year, called Financing Faith, that I'm going to quote from. Ultimately, all funds earned by the church's investments go back to supporting its mission to invite souls to come into Christ. Fact check. That certainly isn't true for at least $100 billion of those funds. 0 of those dollars have ever gone to helping souls come into Christ, and tithing isn't invested anywhere else outside of the EPA universe that we know of. Dear presiding bishop, try not to confuse all with 0 in your next speech. Here's another one. Whether church funds are from reserves or directly from the tithing of members, all are used for the singular purpose of supporting the mission of the church. Reserve funds exist for no other reason. In this context, funds means operating budgets. Mr. Gausset knows full well that EPA reserve funds have never supplemented an operating budget, ever. But he doesn't mind implying that they might have supplemented one, even though they haven't, by casually saying, whether the reserves do something or not, blah, 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 smoke and mirrors. He goes on, quote,
So, since that has never happened, and he knows that, for him to say that, he's implying that it at least could be the case, or when he knows that it's not true. So, that's with intent to deceive. If we turn to our 1966 version, I'm sure, of Mormon doctrine, it'll match what was in the version that I had, that I bought when I ran the church bookstore. And according to Apostle Elder Bruce R. McConkie, withholding information or making statements such as that with intent to deceive means you are a liar. That's Mormon doctrine. Oh, but we can't count it because Bruce said it, and Bruce fell out of favor by being too accurate so that the Mormon leaders would have to be accountable for all the things they said about why Negroes weren't worthy to hold the priesthood.
These funds are invested solely to support the church's mission to preach the gospel to all nations and prepare for the Lord's second coming. Fact check. No money has ever flowed out of EPA for missionary work or to prepare for the second coming. It's simply not true. Dear presiding bishop, try not to confuse supporting with hoarding.
So he lied.
He also says, in the United States, where churches and other nonprofit organizations are generally exempt from federal and state income tax, the church pays taxes on any income it derives from revenue-producing activities that are regularly carried on and are not substantially related to its tax-exempt purposes. Fact check. False. Multiple billions of dollars in income is derived from EPA investments, which is a revenue-producing activity each year. This activity is regular. It is not related to a tax-exempt purpose. The IRS makes clear that asset management is not related to a tax-exempt purpose. Here's a copy of EPA's 990T from 2017.
Okay, so now he's going to roast the executives at this at Ensign Peak Advisors. But I just want to make sure we're clear on the fact that this was a general conference. The presiding bishop of the church lied about those 3 things. In each instance where he was fact-checked, he was found to have lied. The servant of the Lord, the top bishop, the presiding bishop in Zion, was lying through his goddamned French teeth. Monsieur Liar.
Oh, how interesting. It paid $0 in that year, even though it made about $6 billion in investment returns. Now, I couldn't find a 990T for 2018 or 2016, but here are the others going back from 2015 to 2010. 2015, 0. 2014, 139K. 2013, 0. 2012, 26K. 2011, 0. 2010, 0. Try this one. Quote, the ongoing maintenance and upkeep, utilities, and use of the buildings can only be achieved as long as faithful members continue to support the church, close quote. Fact check. Maintenance, upkeep, utilities, and depreciation are mere rounding errors in the COP budget, and definitely wouldn't show up in the EPA budget for 4 decimal places. But of course, EPA doesn't do anything religious or charitable anyways. This one is a doozy. Mr. Kause, in 2018, quotes former COP CEO President Gordon B. Hinckley from 1985, saying, quote, the combined income from all of these business interests is relatively small and would not keep the work going for longer than a very brief period, close quote. That might have been something permissible to say in 1985, but Mr.
No. Calling all of the church's income through business activity as relatively small, relative to what? The global economy? It's fucking huge. That was bullshit then. And yes, it is even more bullshit now after these years of economic expansion for the church. Now, relative to the ability of how that compared to the church's budget, that's where his statement of saying that 1985, maybe that was permissible. Well, these are ambiguous terms. They're very nebulous. He's not saying anything that is exact, and so there's always some plausible deniability as far as how long is a long time that the church's budget could be sustained by just the business profits of the church, as opposed to everything combined with the tithing money, which now is not needed at all, and yet Monsieur What's-His-Face, the presiding bishop, is lying through his teeth, and the justification he's using for people to pay tithing is so small in comparison to the earnings in the business interest of the church, that he's saying that these are like rounding figures. I mean, it's like nothing, and yet he's pumping this up. Oh, think of all the electricity for all these buildings, and that's like nothing compared to the money that they're bringing in. So in other words, they're working y'all. These guys are snake oil salesmen. That's what he's telling us here. And he's not just giving us rhetoric like Kwaku. He's showing facts and figures to back up his mouth.
Kause knows that it is entirely misleading and grotesque to quote it now. Perhaps the COP's lawyers, Curtin and McConkie, advised him that it's not the reader's fault if they assume that the situation hasn't changed in 34 years, so quote the prophet. Fact check. The annual investment returns at EPA generate more cash every year than the total membership contributes every year. That's $7 billion per year compared to about $6 billion per year that is contributed. If every member of the Mormon Church stopped paying their tithing right now and forever, EPA would have enough to keep the work going for much longer than a very brief period. It would be able to keep the work going on in perpetuity, and EPA would still be growing. Dear presiding bishop, try not to confuse brief with perpetuity. If it's not obvious by now, this is just a sample of quotes that represent a sustained intent to deceive the members about the size of the COP's reserves in EPA. Leadership knew that they would benefit materially from that sustained deceit, and they did as the money kept rolling in, even though they knew that it wouldn't if members knew the truth about how much they had hoarded and how little of it was ever being used for anything good.
Hi, Chris.
That is the textbook definition of fraud. Sustained intent to deceive, knowing that they would benefit from it materially, and they did. So it's one thing to deliberately make EPA look small to members with fraudulent statements. It's another thing to make EPA look small to custodians and brokers in the financial community. But it is another thing entirely to deliberately make EPA look small to the IRS. Did you catch it on the 990Ts I showed you earlier? Look at this one from 2007. Box H. Describe the organization's primary unrelated business activity. Investing. Okay, so they admit that investing is an unrelated business activity. So far, so good. Box C. Book value of all assets at end of year. Clearly, this must be the assets from investing. Roger Clark affirmed under penalty of perjury that the book value of EPA is $1 million. Again, with a decimal point, implying that all 7 digits here are significant.
On 11/11/11.
Does Roger Clark, the managing director of EPA and president, not know that the true book value of all of EPA's owned assets was $38 billion in 2007? He chose to report a number that is 38,000 times too small.
That's called dishonest.
He does the same thing in the next year. And in 2010, this time writing in last minute by hand the word over, perhaps to assuage his conscience, but not too much. Now the non-real estate investment assets are $40 billion. 2011.
Assuage his conscience, or perhaps try to mitigate the results of prosecution at some point.
Now solidifying the pattern by typing the word over, the truth, $41 billion. Now the instructions in the IRS code say that this must be the actual book value, not an approximation, not a threshold, the actual book value. 2012. Now Don Klaus is also ready to misrepresent the book value of all assets by a factor of 47,000.
On 11/11.
2013, about $52 billion. 2014, about $58 billion. 2015, about $65 billion. 2017, it looks like they've just given up reporting any number at this point. No one is stopping them. He did. So what else are they not coming clean about? No one knows. Well, I guess maybe a few people at the very top know whether there are other hidden stores of wealth besides EPA. I mean, there could be billions parked around the world just hanging out if they're there. These are the big reserves that EPA does know about. Again, this slide comes from EPA itself. It's Exhibit H.2. The total reserves, obviously, are way more than 124 billion. I don't know how much is sitting right now in Deseret Trust Company or Deseret Management Company Reserve Trust or certain holding companies or many, many property reserves. Some of you might know that the Mormon Church owns about 2% of the land of the state of Florida. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Just for fun, let's look at how much money the COP sent to areas all around the world that are not self-supporting. This is Exhibit N in the full paper. You can see that in 2013, the COP gave $257 million to Brazil's church programs. On the flip side, in 2007, it gave $100,000 to Slovenia. In total, it sent $11.1 billion over 11 years abroad. The LDS Church reported that its total membership in 2013 was about 15.1 million members, and it can be verified that about 56.3% were living outside the United States and Canada at the time. So if you do the math, that turns out to be a little bit more than $10 per member per month. So you decide whether the shepherd would think that the international flock is being taken care of. It is generally true that from 2003 to 2013, the COP put more money into its reserve of the reserves than it spent on supplementing its members who can't support themselves.
Now here's a little detail regarding the pure tithing funds, which the brethren tell us don't buy shopping malls, and they've lied.
You get a slightly better interest rate than you could in your own checking account. After a while, it migrates into the long-term retirement account where it purchases stocks and bonds and the like. There it gets fully mixed with prior tithing capital and realized gains from prior invested tithing. The church makes absolutely no effort to separate pure tithing from returns on pure tithing once the funds move over from the treasury to the allocated capital. As you'll see later, that's important because leaders and apologists keep saying that the sacred money is kept separate, but it's not. Now, of course, the COP could make a capital call for religious, educational, and charitable purposes, but it never has. 2 times money has come back from EPA and into for-profit concerns on the COP side, but again, those were not qualified distributions. So where did that money go? Let's look at Exhibit B. This slide was also made within the EPA. These are the biggest affiliates and relationships that EPA had at the time, and they haven't really changed much since then. The first distribution went to Beneficial Financial Group, BFG. Remember in 2009 when the federal government was bailing out the church's preferred bank, Zions Bank? And it turns out that at the same time, the church was silently bailing out Beneficial Financial Group with a $600 million check to keep it from collapsing. Clearly, the church wanted to avoid the publicity and humiliation of a failed, church-owned, for-profit business, so they had EPA make a non-publicly disclosed outflow to BFG. Their mistake, of course, was that the money that they used was irrevocably dedicated to religious, educational, or charitable purposes. They could have moved money around between the COP's for-profit businesses, but then tons of businessmen would know that something was up. They didn't want that, so using EPA money was fast, and as long as nobody told the IRS, then nobody in the world would know. Well, now you know. To be clear, this was not an investment. There is no loan on EPA's balance sheet with Beneficial Life. This was a certain outflow, an unqualified distribution under the table. BFG never paid it back because there was no expectation that it had to. And this was done using 100% tithing money. The check was cut from the EPA Treasury account before it had a chance to ever get invested. In the essentials, it's the same story with this second misapplication of funds. EPA paid $1.4 billion exclusively using tithing on the cost overruns associated with building the City Creek Mall between 2009 and 2014. The financing plan for the mall was clearly also impacted by the 2008 financial crisis. Now, EPA did not make an investment in the mall or give it a loan. No such investment or loan receivable appears on EPA's balance sheet. The mall is on PRI's balance sheet. This is important because the Ensign magazine said in 2006, quote, "No tithing funds will be used in the redevelopment." That might have been the plan, but that's not what happened, and no one ever revealed the whole truth to the members afterwards. In 2007, the Deseret News reported, quote, "Money for the project is not coming from LDS church members' tithing donations. City Creek Center is being developed by Property Reserve, Inc., the church's real estate development arm, and its money comes from other real estate ventures." Well, here are the facts. PRI does receive some money from other real estate ventures, but it also receives most of its money from tithing surplus. We saw that on Exhibit C. Here's another fact. PRI did finance some of the City Creek Mall, but most of the financing came from EPA using exclusively never invested tithing dollars, $1.4 billion. 5 years later, Keith McMullen, a member of the corporation of the presiding bishopric at the time, reportedly said to the Salt Lake Tribune, quote, "Not one penny of tithing goes to the church's for-profit endeavors. Specifically, the church has said no tithing went toward City Creek Center." Notice that he didn't say that was true of himself. He said that the church had said that in the past. But the fact is, checks from EPA's treasury containing only never invested tithing had already been written by the time Mr. McMullen made this intentionally misleading public statement. So this is just one of many examples of misdirection, smoke and mirrors. It comes out of COP leadership and their public affairs department. But the question that I have right now is, how is it that the very smart EPA employees somehow not realize or ask fundamental questions about what is really going on with the firm? As you can see from this slide, Exhibit G, the EPA tells its own employees in its new staff orientation guide that it's a tax-exempt organization basically for 4 reasons. Number 1, it makes withdrawals for prophetic initiatives like building the conference center and temples. But does that happen? Nope. Here's the alternate version of that same slide that went to the presiding bishopric instead of the new employees at the same time. In the full paper, this is Exhibit D. Notice that it says, examples of withdrawals. Conference center, $0, funded out of the COP operating budget. Temple construction, $0. That was also funded out of the COP operating budget. Are any of these other things listed prophetic initiatives? Neither of the 2 bailouts were prophetic. They were very reactionary and unlawful, unfortunately. Number 2 is a resounding no. The COP has never asked EPA to help balance a budget. The COP moves tithing around and tops off the coffers all upstream to EPA activity. And this includes helping in areas of the world where those third countries can't sustain themselves with their own tithing. EPA is definitely the reserve of the reserves. To overuse the "my cup runneth over" reference, EPA gets what runneth over the last of many filled cups. Okay, number 3 on the list was to backstop the pension if we ever got into trouble, and to be ready to help affiliates like BYU with their big growth plans. Nothing on either score has ever happened.
So, notwithstanding Kwaku's attempts to divert us from the real points and his multiple outright lies, the fact is that the LDS church leaders are perennially dishonest because they've been hucksters and Freemasons from the very beginning, and nothing's changed. The sun is setting on the period of time where the Mormon public affairs and media departments are going to be able to deceive the people into thinking that these are reputable men and not the hucksters that they truly are. I recommend all of you watching the full-length video and also my review of this letter to an IRS director. Know the truth. Take the time to do the research. Don't be tricked by hucksters and their shills like Kwaku. When you've been exposed to the truth, it becomes immoral to support the LDS Church in any fashion thereafter, knowing that lives are being destroyed, sometimes in death, sometimes in divorce, many ways. Instead, take some of those tithing dollars that you should be saving now and contribute to efforts to bring down this evil church and to expose its mind control and actually save the lives of all sorts of people, including children. Those could be your kids.